Okay, I guess we can start. So good day to everybody, and welcome to the BiNational Water Shortage Crisis. This is a webinar sponsored by the World Association of Public-Private Partnerships in P3 units. And with that, I want to first of all introduce our opening remarks by Mr. David Baxter. David Baxter is an international recognized P3 consultant, a senior at the Institute of Sustainable Resilience Center. And he's been doing P3s worldwide for many years. So he's going to do opening remarks. And with that, Mr. David Baxter, please.
Okay. Good day. Welcome to everyone. It's a pleasure to participate in this webinar, which is part of a series of webinars that the World Association of PPP Units and Professionals presents on an ongoing basis. I and the team here represent the North American chapter of WAPPP, and that includes Mexico, the United States, as well as Canada, and then the English-speaking countries of the Caribbean. And our focus at WAPPP is to be a non-partisan, non-political group of, or an organization where it gives a platform to PPP practitioners, whether they work for the public sector or whether they work for the private sector, to chat, to share ideas, and to learn from one another. And this is what we are doing in this presentation. Transnational PPP projects are a common occurrence that people are always not aware how common they are. But one thing that we have to realize that with projects, especially of the nature of this one that we're going to talk about with water, is that water systems, water basins, etc., don't recognize always political boundaries. They are physiographical structures. And so any of you who know the border between the United States and Mexico, there's a lot of movement of people. There's also a lot of geophysical structures that are common. Transnational projects also are becoming quite popular in the sense of the need for countries to collaborate and cooperate. And it doesn't make any sense in the case of a water project of this nature that it only goes up to the border of one country and doesn't go beyond that. They are difficult in some ways, even though there could be a very strong understanding of the need for it, because there are political considerations that have to be taken at heart. And that is, for example, when you have two different countries that have their own interest in specific sovereign rights and they have different priorities. And these are some of the things that, we will talk about later on and that you can ask questions. But the biggest thing is that when we do transnational projects, there's a focus on finding consensus based on a common need. So we have common goals. Basically, what has to happen, and in this case, this is an easy story, is that the prioritization of water is very important, or the supply of water is very important to both nations that we're going to be talking about. There needs to be also harmonization of policy and practice across borders for common or transnational projects to occur. This includes different legal systems, different financial systems, which have to be, attuned with one another. And basically, I just want to end in the sense that, we are facing a situation in a dynamic world, a changing world, where there are needs transnational for countries to help one another. And it's becoming, very common along the Canadian border and the US border. There are projects already, and Laurie might even be able to comment about that later. It's not new to the region, same on the Mexican-US border. So the fundamentals and the understandings and the background and the base ideas all exist. It's just, as I said, finding a common will, a common interest to do something when both countries need it. So that's my little introduction. I'm going to hand back over to Oscar.
Thank you, David. Well, before we start and I introduce our distinguished guest speaker, Larry Fanning, I do want to give you a little bit of a housekeeping. we are going to have a presentation by Larry for about half an hour. After that, we're going to have a roundtable discussion with the North American Leadership Committee from WAPP, where we will discuss how does this project make it a viable project. We'll do a mini feasibility. We'll look at different perspectives, as David mentioned. There is a lot of sensitive issues, especially the relationship between the United States and Mexico, the historical perspective, but also the different governments and the stakeholders involved. And one of the objectives of always in WAPP is to have people first, to make be aligned with the sustainable development goals. There's certainly water is one of them. So we will dive into how to make this project viable from a P3 perspective. And we have very good people involved who can give us advice on how to make this happen. So then after we do that roundtable discussion, we will open this for Q&A. The mechanism will be, if you have a question, please use the chat and I'll read it directly from there and I'll mention your name. And we'll have about 10, 15 minutes for Q&A with everybody. All right, so let me read Larry Fanning's biography. Mr. Fanning is a highly experienced geoscientist and engineering geologist. He holds a degree in geology and earth science from UC Santa Cruz, among other distinguished universities. He has 38 years of experience in applied engineering, soil mechanics, rock mechanics, hydrology, groundwater, fluid mechanics, and obviously also in the construction. He has served as a full board member from the governor-appointed geology board in California. He's also been a subject matter expert in many litigations. He's a registered professional geologist and also certified. And over the last 15 years, he's the founding and president of G3 Soil Works, also a principal at New Water Group, which is the corporation that's leading the effort for this particular proposal that you can see in the slide. He has worked in California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, all over the United States, Missouri, including Mexico. So with that, Larry, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Oscar. I'd like to thank the group here for inviting me here today. I am very happy to share a solution to a very large problem that's looming on us. Essentially on the 100th birthday of the treaty for the Colorado River in 1922, that we need to enter into a new paradigm, which is due to climate change, where what we had thought was happening in the distant past is no longer happening, and we need to meet that challenge with technology and by binational cooperation. In the case of the original Colorado River Agreement, as everyone knows that, or may be aware, that the United States in 1922 started doing, or as of 1920s, 1900s, started taking a great interest in developing the region in the Southwest, and that the Colorado was the answer to that development. They came up with an amazing program. The Bureau it's not to be slighted in any way. However, that technology was different back in the 1800s, early 1900s, and their considerations were different also. So I'm looking forward to an opportunity here to bring us forward into the 21st century with an opportunity to introduce new technology and new approaches. And this is where I think PPP applies directly. I think you'll find this is quite a poster child for that. So what we're addressing here today is the water crisis that's introduced by this 22-year drought that represents the worst drought in the region for at least the last 1,200 years, and maybe for the last 2,000 years. And it's this condition is something that's been in the fossil record. It's repeated over time, and that this is a situation that's more than likely not going to go away. So with that, I'd like to just dive into this. Let's go with our first slide, Katie. Okay. We need to. So what's our current situation? Our area is lacking water. We have an incredible development demand. in California, in Arizona, in Nevada, and in Mexico, northern Mexico. People are coming in more and more every day, and the demand on water in an area that's otherwise a desert is profound. The Colorado River has been taxed for years, and unfortunately, some people have called it a deficit river, as though it's the fault of the rivers to not provide enough water. Like I said, the Bureau came in the early 1900s and changed the Colorado River and developed it and installed, starting with Hoover Dam. And this created a brand new changed condition for everything downstream of that. So the Colorado flows are waning. It can't be doubted. Mexico's supply of water is of poor quality, and it's insecure. Right now, they're having to blend the water on the Colorado with water from the Gila River to make up what Mexico's demand is, which has lowered the quality. And importantly, there's no alternative source of water that's naturally occurring. What's happened as a result of this? We have incredible regional damage to farmland and ecosystems due to salt impacts and waterlogging and other similar effects. And these have also created adverse impacts on public health. And the prognosis, it's only going to get worse if we don't do something about it now. Next. Okay, let's look at the current conditions for Lake Mead. Lake Mead was completed in 1936, filled up by 1941. Right now, it's at an elevation of about 1046 feet as of a couple of days ago. It's currently at 29% of its capacity. The inflows of the water, even as wet as this water year was, are only 92% of what happened last year because of where the source of the water comes from Lake Mead. Mead is down 16 feet from a year ago, and a year before that it was down another 20 feet, and a year before that it was 30 feet. The evaporative losses on the river, on the lake itself, is 800,000 acre feet per year, an incredible amount of water. This is trying to size the situation that we're in. It's big, and it's also really dangerous. So we have a full pool hydroelectric capacity where that is about 2,000 megawatts. This is another aspect of the problems that are developing here on the Colorado that nobody talks about really. So right now, because of the level being so low, it's only putting about 1,000 megawatts. At elevation 950 feet, you can see that's less than 100 feet in elevation from where we are now. There's the hydroelectric cutoff where they'll have to stop producing electricity because the water level will be below the penstock intakes. At 50 feet below that, essentially, we get to what's called dead pool. And at that, just like the name says, we're all dead. And no more water would flow out of the lake. Next. Here are some graphs showing the conditions that have been occurring on Lake Mead over time. And they've been recently updated to reflect the current year. And as you can see at the current year at elevation just below 1050, that elevation is lower than any elevation that the lake has experienced over its time frame of since construction and since its original filling. And when you look at the storage, same kind of condition. Storage condition is very low and lower than it's ever been since its original filling. Next, now let's look at what's feeding Lake Mead, which is Lake Powell. Lake Powell was constructed in 1963, strangely enough, after the construction of Lake Mead. And the reason it was originally constructed and wanted to be put in was to control sediment, increase the overall storage, and to regulate flow into Lake Mead. That Lake Mead was receiving 91,000 acre feet of sediment per year, which is millions of cubic yards of material. And it was essentially going to fill in. Now, with the construction of Lake Powell, Lake Mead has an infinite lifespan, quote unquote infinite. Right now, Lake Powell sits at about 22% capacity and falling. The rivers that are feeding in the reservoirs to Lake Powell are at 60% capacity. And the material, it just isn't getting better. The full pool capacity is 1,300 megawatts. Right now, we're making less than half that. The critical hydroelectric pool is only 32 feet away from its current elevation. The dead pool isn't much below that. And something to note, that as lake levels decrease, the change in elevation versus storage increases, meaning the lower it gets, the faster it runs out. That's just because of the way lakes are shaped. Next, we'll look at the similar graph for Lake Powell. You can see a similar story. We're dangerously close to a very, very bad situation. Next. Now let's look at demand. You can see the dark blue line, water consumption line. That water consumption line is only increasing with time. And the red line and the available water lines, as you can see, are dropping. And if this were to be projected to the current date, this would be even worse. And you can put your pointer down here. Our supply would be somewhere in here, and our demand would be somewhere up in here. This is a bad situation. We need a lot of water to make up for this difference, just if everything else was status quo, let alone allow these lakes to recover their original elevation so that we have some security in both energy and water supply. Next. Okay, so dead pool. This is a disaster beyond disasters. In my mind, worse than the biggest earthquake that could hit the San Andreas, worse than an asteroid impact or a volcanic eruption. The loss of water supply to the basin states. Once Lake Mead runs below dead pool, everything flowing below that is cut off. You're not going to get any more water to Arizona, no more water to Southern California, no more water to Mexico. And as you can see, Arizona depends on at least a third. Southern California depends on about a third of its total supply and growing on the Colorado. But Mexico relies on 90% of it for northern Baja. All the agriculture in Imperial Valley, Coachella, and Mexicali would be lost. That's one of the largest bread baskets in the world. Lake Mojave sits below Lake Mead and Lake Havasu, which would be the only saving graces on the Colorado should Lake Mead stop flowing, have very limited capacity. And when you consider that 9 million acre feet a year is what's passing through Lake Mead on an average, the total capacity of Lake Mojave and Lake Havasu are nothing in comparison to that. They won't last long. But you're going to lose an incredible amount of electric supply in a world that's depending more and more upon electricity to run things. So given the current trends, without a huge new supply of water and quickly, the risk of disaster is very, very real. And you just don't have to even look too far into the past of humankind to see that there's been lots of civilizations that did really, really well till they ran out of water and then they disappeared. Next. Let's look at some of the environmental damage. Salt. Salt is the enemy. That's the enemy beyond any kind of trichloroethylene, any kind of organic chemical, even worse than plutonium. Salt is ubiquitous and it destroys everything it comes in contact with. The only place salt belongs is in the ocean. The Colorado River water carries about 1 ton of salt per acre foot dissolved in it. So every acre foot of water that gets applied as agriculture or is put into the Salton Sea or drains through the areas of Mexicali and is used in farmland and evaporates is putting 1 ton of salt on the ground. That adds up fast. The treaty that let's go back to the change in river dynamics is profound also. Before the Colorado River was dammed, about 16 million acre feet per year flowed through the Delta in Mexicali and southeastern California. And that kept the salt at bay. It kept everything flushed in Coachella. The systems that were in place there by nature were self-regulating, and salt was not an issue. And in fact, it was probably one of the greenest and most beautiful places on earth. And then we come in and we put the dam in for our own purposes. And if we didn't put the dam in, like I said in my opening remarks, there would be no Los Angeles, there would be no California, there would be no Arizona as we know it. There would be no northern Mexico as we know it. It would be a very difficult river to control, and it would be more of a hazard than it would be a benefit. So my hat's off to the Bureau in all of this, but now we need to take it further. To go a little further with this, back in the day when they did the original treaty, they only considered volumetrically what kind of water gets to Mexico. And that requirement was 1.5 million acre feet per year. And it was regardless of the quality. That quality of water has typically been essentially at the bottom of the barrel. And the water flowing into Mexico has been cut by the Gila River. It's got a TDS that often exceeds the allowable drinking water quality standards set by the EPA, meaning it's over 1,000 TDS, sometimes 1,500 TDS, where 500 is the public health goal. It's caused an incredible amount of salt deposition in the valley and in the Salton Sea, and in particular has destroyed lower Mexicali Valley and the Colorado River Delta and the upper Gulf, all of which are critical to the habitat of the marine life in the Gulf of California. Then the salt also couldn't happen in a worse place. It's dry, it's windy, and you put all this salt on the ground and it becomes fugitive dust. Northern Mexico and Imperial Valley have the terrible distinction of having the highest occurrences of respiratory diseases and cancer in California and in Mexico, respectively, because of this problem. The salt has also literally destroyed habitat that was critical to everyone concerned. Next. These are satellite photographs of what's happened in the Delta and Mexicali area. This area up here, this is Imperial for reference, Imperial County. The US border runs here along the All-American Canal. This area in here is Mexicali Valley. The area right there with the blue spot is Cerro Preto. The Colorado River comes through here. Oh, shoot, go back one, sorry. Goes through here, comes down, and you can see what happens with the salt content in the river. Notice the river up here where it's coming down from Lake Havasu. It's coming down here through this passage down here into Senator Wash. Look at all the green. Green, 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 comes down in here, enters into Morales Dam, and all of a sudden, everything within the river channel itself is devoid of heavy life. There's no vegetation in it. That should be a dark green stripe. Further, as it comes down into here and runs out of steam. And most of the time, it never even makes it to the ocean. So let's look a little closer, zooming in on the area here. This is a critical area. You can see where the Colorado River remnants and all the tailwater from Mexicali come down and converge. And you have an area where you form what are called oxbows and heavy meanders. All of these say that this river is choking to death. It's got more sediment and salt in it than it can flush out, and it runs over itself, trips over itself, and just builds up in this area. And you can notice that there's a demarcation line here where nothing is growing below that, essentially. And when you get further into the Gulf, you'll notice these white areas here, white areas here, white areas in here, and this area in here completely devoid of life. All of this, it represents salt poisoning. Next. Let's look a little closer at the Delta. This is the cradle of life for the Gulf of California. This is a relatively recent picture, 2020. This area in here, Salinas de Olmetepec, is all crusted over with salt. The area in here, this dark circle, that's a salt swamp, and it has salinity that's about 50% higher than ocean water. Same for this area in here, the Cienega de Santa Clara. And this area in here, all salted out. One thing you will not see is vegetation of any kind. And even when you look up close, these are up close pictures, you have nothing but salt. And you may have some real scrubby salt scrub of some kind or another, but as far as vegetation goes, nothing. And all of this salt is not only killing everything on the surface of the ground, it's destroying the groundwater that's in it, around it, and under it. And also this salinity is calving off into the Gulf, into shallow water, and destroying the ecosystems that are associated with that. And why is that important? Because plankton is the key to every form of life in the ocean. And that high salinity kills it. You can see all the silt, everything washing out, but what you don't see is any kind of life. You don't see any kind of life in this lower picture here. This looks like what Dante's Inferno would imply hell looked like. Next. These are pictures that were taken before the river was dammed up. This picture here, I think, is of Fremont himself. And he's in a canoe back in the late 1800s. And you can see it's tall trees and vegetation as far as the eye can see. This condition here, oh, it's a different delta. It represents what was present before the dams were put into place and that the current conditions were starting to develop. We want to get back to that because that's what's critical for sustainable life in the Gulf of California and to maintain the environmental quality of the area and the Salton Trough itself. Next. So how do we approach these challenges? What we need to do is we need to fix the salt damage. We need to reclaim all the land that was lost, thousands of acres of property lost. Incredible and similar, thousands of acres of critical habitat lost. Damaged groundwater systems that are undrinkable and unusable now. Surface water that you saw the character of it. And we also need to find a significant new water supply. And this significance cannot be understated. You're not going to fix this with a simple plant or 2 or 3 or 10 or 20. You're going to, and like what you see along the coast in California and other places, you need something big. We're talking millions of acre feet per year. That's what it's going to take to fix this. These are big challenges. We need binational support, both public and private, to address this, and we got to move fast. Next. So let's look at my solution, the solution that the New Water Group has come up with. And we've come up with a solution that was originally tailored to addressing the reclamation of Mexicali Valley and the Salton Sea by my original work in Mexico with the representatives in Baja and with IID and representatives in California. And we found that there was an incredible beneficial side effect to this reclamation if we did it the right way, that we could generate an incredible amount of fresh water and using all the other incredible resources that Mexico has available to it, restore Sierra Preto, one of the largest geothermal fields in the world, to a glory that has never been seen in humankind. That this is the ultimate form of green energy. It's literally inexhaustible. And when we combine those two together, we got a fix that not only fixes the problem, but provides for our future. Next. So what are the solution steps? Well, what we're looking at is essentially mining all the salty saltwater and salt groundwater and salt development along the coast of northern the Gulf of California that is made up of old ancient deposits of Colorado River Delta materials that are sandy. They make very good aquifers, and they're not connected to anything beneficial. We're going to look at how we're going to process that, how we're going to deliver it, and what we're going to do with the discharge. So next. Extraction. Our extraction steps are not going to be using the conventional open intake that you see on the coast in various places that have wreaked havoc, not only wreaked havoc on the marine life, but also wreaked havoc on the desalination plant itself. About 30 to 40% of the total operating costs for your average open intake desalination plant is related to scale and fouling. With groundwater, the ground itself filters the water, gets all the particulates out, and in fact, insulates the intake from interfering with the biology and the oceanography of the overlying ocean. Next. So what we would do is we'd have a variety of different type of wells in discrete well fields that would employ thousands of these wells that would mine ocean marine groundwater and saline groundwater that has no beneficial use. That water would be pumped by a whole variety of different wells. That would be the type of well we would use would be dependent on the kind of conditions that we were encountering in any one particular area. They'd all be manifolded together and put into a pipeline to run up to a central processing plant. Next. These are some of the different types of wells we would use. In some places, we may use what are called rainy wells. We may use infiltrators on the beach. Next, we may be using well points and vacuum extraction. We may be using long slant drills that use oil well technology to run wells far out to sea, and that we would be mining off the sea floor all the groundwater that would infiltrate that into our pipeline and pump it. The whole time that we're doing this, the marine life over it doesn't even know we're there. We don't interfere with marine life in any way. And we're removing all this accumulated salt that's come into these areas. Next. So these well fields, as I said, are in different well groups, starting here with the southerly well group. Again, this area here is a little bit further below the area of the delta reach. So these would probably be the long slant drills going out to sea. Then we have the northerly well group that's above that, centered on Ometepec, Salinas de Ometepec. And then we have a third well group, next page, that is for a different purpose called the delta well fields. The delta well field's primary purpose is to mine polluted groundwater in the upper groundwaters and the lower groundwaters as they're introducing new fresh water from our reclamation programs and from farming and using the new water that we're going to be providing Mexico. We're going to create a front that removes this salty buildup here and replaces it over time with fresher waters. And this process may take 50 years, may take 100 years. It took 100 years to get to this point, so it may take us a while to get back out again, but at least we'll be removing the salt faster than it can accumulate. Next. Now we're going to deliver all of that in a pipeline that's going to be anywhere from a 1 barrel to 4 barrel, 15-foot diameter line that runs along the coast and goes up to Cerro Preto, where we have our geothermal fields. And we're going to be centering our processing plant over the top of that because that's where the energy is. Next. So we're going to be taking all of this water and we're going to run it into a variety of, I don't want to go into the technical parts because time's a factor, but we're going to have two different types of extraction for extracting the fresh water from the seawater. One of those is going to be piggybacking, having desalination plants and distillery plants, piggybacking directly off of the waste heat from active turbine operations and electric generation. And then we'll also be doing heat mining ourselves that mines directly heat at the lower limits that is a much higher value that's not necessarily available for conventional geothermal energy generation. And we're going to piggyback these systems in a parallel series routing so that we can squeeze every drop of fresh water that we can out of this. And then we're going to responsibly discharge the leftover brine after we've extracted everything we can out of it. And we've got all the reclamation liquids that we've removed from the area. We're going to put that in a responsible manner into the Gulf of California in a way that it'll be authoritatively removed by natural processes and currents. Next. So let's take a look at Cerro Preto, where the central hub of where we're going to process everything. Cerro Preto represents a hole in the Earth's crust that's due to pull aparts, where the Gulf of California has been unzippering from the coast of North America. And it opens up the mantle of the Earth to communication with sediments and material in the crust. What this represents is an almost inexhaustible source of heat if it was properly managed. The current geothermal fields are located in here, and they involve older technology that we intend to replace in the program with new technology. We also intend to expand use of these lower units And we're also looking at taking the waste stream materials from the generation of the upper units and moving it across the valley and depositing it along a zone where it's far away from the processing plants and doesn't end up inadvertently cooling the heat that we needed for generation of energy. And that's what happened in Cerro Preto originally, was the design didn't take into account the proper distribution of the waste heat stream, the waste material. So it's essentially dumping cool water over the top of hot water and everything cooled off. So what happened when they tried to deal with that was, well, we can't put the water back in, so we're going to store it in a big pond. And eventually the area of the pond ran out and started leaking. And now this entire area in here is saturated in salt. So we're going to be cleaning that up as well as part of our work. So there's a real good reason why we want to do this. The size of the energy in this right now is nameplate is about 7.5 gigawatts. We think, based on peer-reviewed studies and direct exploration that's been occurring recently, that this may be expandable to 3 times that amount. And that's something that we intend to, as a byproduct, develop on the behalf of Mexico, to develop new electricity, not only for Mexico's use, but for Mexico to sell to the United States to make up for the losses on the Colorado River. Next. This just illustrates kind of the areas that we were looking at developing. I won't go into it here. Next. This also looks at how your typical double flash geothermal plant operates. And what we're going to be doing is, instead of allowing that heat to go to a cooling tower, we're going to take that heat and we're going to put it to use in distillation. One of the beautiful things about using hot water and hot steam to evaporate water is thermodynamically, you couldn't get a better way to do it. And you're not changing from one type of energy to another. You're taking latent heat in water and putting it in as latent heat into steam and distillation, as opposed to taking natural gas, converting that into electricity, converting that into heat, and then ending up with your distillation process. Much more effective. Next. This is kind of a concept of how we would be directly heat mining energy to do desalination using some of the deeper, very high temperature materials that would not necessarily cool off appreciably over time when you extract the heat. And that this is an alternative method to supplement our supply. We have a lot of water we got to make. This plant is going to need to process about 4.5 million gallons per minute. And we're going to be looking at making about, ultimately an ultimate capacity is about 5 million acre feet. Next. This shows how, as essentially a flow chart diagram of how all the material is handled. So we have our input from our main conveyance system. We take the groundwater, we allow it to sit and age, any sediment that may be in it, anything that's in it, allow it to settle. And then we take it to the desal units. We get fresh water from the desal units, put them in an accumulator where they're aerated, blended, and it goes to a plant for distribution. And then we have the reject from the desal units, this highly saline reject material. And then we have any material that we've gathered up from reclamation. And when I say reclamation waste, I mean, we, as part of the program, we intend to put wastewater treatment plants in Mexicali and in San Felipe to help provide them a means of appropriate sanitation control and protect their water resources. So we're going to be taking the reject from that and adding it to this. And then when we put all of that into this area here for aging, we're not just going to let it sit and cool off. We're going to do solar and thermal, I guess we'd call it passive thermal distillation. And we're going to take even more water out of it. So by the time we send it to our outfall, we've squeezed everything out of it we can. Because we didn't go to all that trouble to pump it out, just to pump it back into the ground, ocean again. Next. Now, delivery. When we go to the next slide, we need to deliver this. So what we're going to be doing is we'll have a series of conveyance lines. The westerly conveyance line, which runs up to, oops, sorry. And then we have the central conveyance line, which also supplies Mexicali with a new supply of fresh water and a utility corridor for energy. And then we have the easterly line that ties into Morales Dam, has a spur to go to the East Mesa for water banking, and also a connection to go up into Arizona for direct connection to any pipeline systems they would like to bring down.
Larry,
Next.
5 minutes, Larry, 5 minutes.
Okay, discharge. This is the crown jewel of our system. The biggest defect I can say of any kind of desalination unit that is located on the coast is that they just dump the reject brine back into the ocean. Brine has the problem of having no air in it because you boil it and extract it, everything from it, that it's warm, and that it has a density that's much higher than the surrounding water. And typically all it does is either fall onto the bottom and create a river of death, or float up to the surface and kill everything on the surface in terms of salinity and heat change. Next, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be smart about this. We're going to look at the natural currents that are already present in the Gulf that keep the system in the Gulf from turning into the Salton Sea. And what you have is you have a steady state current system in here that includes tides of 10, 12, 20 feet or more that are pumping water in and out of this twice a day, and also regional currents that flow up one side and then down the other. As they come up along the coast of Mexico, they're on the surface and they're representing water that's intake from the Eastern Pacific. And then that comes around and becomes bottom water due to an increase in salinity in this area up here, and follows the bottom contours as bottom water back out of the basin. We're going to be introducing our material right into that stream where it's at its most turbulent, and it's going to be picked up and efficiently removed. But we're not just going to dump it in. Next, we're going to be running our pipeline 25 miles offshore to what's called the Wagner Basin. Next. And we're going to be dumping that into the upper part of the stair step that works its way down south into the Pacific. But before we put that brine into the ocean, we're going to process it and we're going to aerate it. We're going to be using nano bubble technology to introduce oxygenation into this. Not only will it oxygenate the material, but the brine itself, but it'll also decrease its density by the fact we're putting bubbles in it. This nano bubble technology is emergent technology, and these bubbles can stay in suspension for days and weeks. Next, we're going to be using an adductor array that has no moving parts, but it'll dilute the water, the brine, by a factor of 5, and mixing it with surrounding seawater, so that by the time the final outcome comes out, you end up with water that's nearly of the same character, oxygenation level, salinity, and temperature of the surrounding seawater. Next.
1 minute.
These guys will be tunable, and then we can adjust them automatically with computer systems that are tied to buoy systems that monitor actual ocean conditions, and that this is a sustainable and responsible way of disposing of this. Next. You can see how the plume goes out into the midwater and it's carried away. Next. This is an overview of the overall system, our well fields, our conveyance line, processing, and delivery. So what's the plan do? It addresses waterlogging issues. It reclaims land and habitat, reclaims surface water and groundwater, reclaims and upgrades Cerro Preto, improves our electrical supply, improves infrastructure to Mexicali and San Felipe, develops new water banking, dedicated water from the Colorado River is going to be put to habitat, provides millions of acre feet of supplemental water for sale by Mexico, and is sustainable, responsible, green, and binational. I can't find anything wrong with it, and so far most of the people we've introduced it to can't either. It's a big challenge. We need support, and we got to move fast. So with that, I thank you. Next.
Thank you, Larry. Very illustrative process of how we can make things happen. I do want to make a couple of comments before we go into discussion with our panelists. This is a people first, Mexico first approach. It is something that is not only about transporting water and desalination. It's more about restoring an ecosystem. That's the essence of the project, to restore a historically bad administration of the river, which has consequences 100 years later. And we're trying to restore the ecosystem in the way that's sustainable and livable. And at the same time, using renewable energy, such as the one from Cerro Prieto, and a closed system. As an engineer, I can appreciate the technical approach they're using for a closed system where you maximize the use of the water and the steam to generate the electricity needed, because it needs a lot of energy. And by the way, there are international commitments between the United States and Mexico per the treaty they have for renewable energy. So this will also satisfy those requirements. In addition to having an opportunity to build up not only the infrastructure to energy and water, but also the situation with near sourcing. As you well know, worldwide, there's a disruption of the supply chains. So why not create a more reliable, sustainable, and a highly more concentrated supply chain between Canada, United States, and Mexico? And what's first, the carriage or the horse? We have to put the infrastructure first, right? That's the horse. The rest comes later. So with that, I do want to dive into how can we make this a viable project. We'll do a mini pre-assessment, how this can be viable. I also have here with us a very distinguished person and good friend. His name is Ziad Alexander. He is the president of the World of WAPPP, and we welcome you here. Ziad, I don't know if you want to say a few words before we start, please.
Thank you, Oscar. Thank you very much. And thank you, Larry, for a wonderful presentation. And very happy that the North American chapter has brought us all together for this discussion. I mean, it seems to be amazing in a bad way that this situation has developed. I'm very curious to hear about cost of your solution, any estimates that you have, and trying to assess whether a private a PPP could be viable, given the challenges of binational politics, and as well as the challenges of private sector entities that I imagine with different types of skills that are needed to form a consortium to achieve this result. But I want to also, before I give back the floor, thank all the participants for participating, and encourage you to also follow up on all the news of WAPPP and other WAPPP events. Thank you.
Thank you, Ziad. Okay, with that, let's start our roundtable discussion. We have here with us ladies first, our distinguished WAPPP member and also part of the North American leadership, Ms. Larry Thomas. She is a binational expert from P3s and a lawyer. So he will give us a perspective of the legal ramifications of setting up a project such as this. As also mentioned before, we have David Baxter. He's an international P3 advisor. He'll give us a perspective of sustainability and what kind of governments and stakeholders are necessary to make this a viable project. Also with us is Mr. Wayne Collins. He is an asset management expert. So I'm sure he's very interested in how to manage an asset such as the geothermal and the plant from a perspective of making it a life cycle analysis, and also something that operates on an efficient level. We have Sharon Saint. He's also a certified P3, and he will talk about technologies and innovations and tools necessary for this type of project. He will also dive in a little bit about some alternative investment tools that he's trying to promote within the framework of a P3. So, and like Ziad said, there is a lot of questions about related what cost, how we can make this a structured P3. It may not everything's a P2. It may be that just the geothermal part is the P2. You can break up a project in many places. This is a large scale project, and it has a lot of buy-in. So with that, I want to ask first, maybe David Baxter, with his experience, what is involved from the stakeholders and the governments? Can you give us a little bit of an illustrated example? What would you think will be needed for this project, David?
So, tying into the idea of people first PPPs, this is a really important element because PPPs in the past were sort of transactional. They were just a process or a mechanism to deliver PPPs, but they forgot, that many of these projects impact people. It's ironic that, we always forgot about the people part. And so WAPPP has been very involved with the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe on the initiative of promoting people first PPPs. And so in the sense of the stakeholders that you're talking about, we would have the public sector, the governments of, the United States, as well as Mexico, but also state governments on both sides, as well as the signatories to the Colorado Compact, because they are, the people who have kind of created a bit of the mess. The other stakeholders, I think, is critically important, are people like Larry from the private sector, who introduce, and this is the wonderful thing about PPPs, who introduce innovative ideas. I'm not slamming government. I used to work for government, but governments aren't always the source of great innovations and great ideas. They are tasked with governing, not creating new ideas specifically. And so, under people first as well, the whole focus has been a change from PPPs being more than a process of delivery, but actually a mechanism to help countries achieve their sustainable development goals. And talking about sustainability and resilience and adaptation, all these terms that are really interlinked with one another. And the whole, as we've seen, and thank you, Larry, for those images that show that we are faced in a situation where there are communities that are becoming less sustainable and face extinction. Essentially, we're at a point, where we have to make a decision. And in the situation like that, water is gold. That's the new gold for many, many regions. And so that other stakeholders would be the communities that need it on both sides of the border. It would be generated in Mexico, but the premise is that they could sell water to the north, to the United States. And so it's the agricultural community, it's politicians. It could look good if they, propose something that solved the downstream crisis of water for cities like San Diego and Los Angeles, for example. And just, the premise is, that when we talk about sustainability, we're not just trying to create a sustainable system or a sustainable ecosystem, or however we want to describe it. We're also trying to create sustainable practices. And so I don't want to touch too much on what Sharon might say, but one thing that's critically important these days with major innovations and sustainability is the whole idea of overcoming technological obsolescence. And the dam structures are now technologically obsolete, and so we're looking for new mechanisms that can offer and introduce two of the most important elements of PPPs, which are value for money. Can we get something that's beneficial out of this? And then, and this is Larry's challenge in the sense of, how is this project bankable? How is it commercially viable? How is it economically viable? And it becomes more economically and more commercially viable as the water crisis gets worse and worse. So I will stop there.
Thank you, David. Well, speaking of banking and speaking of finance, I do want to take opportunity of our president Siad because he has an extensive banking background. So sustainability, how do we bank that? There is a lot of discussion of commitments, and actually there are resources that have been promoted by the World Bank and Inter-American Bank. What do you think? What are you, in your opinion, Siad, of making this a sustainable finance model? Your speaker, you're muted.
Thank you, Oscar. This is a very difficult question.
I know.
Absent
Put you on the spot.
Absolutely. Look, the thing is that the World Bank is not active in the US, and I don't know to what extent it's active in Mexico. The Inter-American Development Bank, of course, is. So I know, obviously, in this being involving Mexico, there could be some multilateral development bank financing available for it, but it may largely need to depend on imaginative or creative issues of green bonds and other such instruments. I think that I don't know to what extent the Biden administration infrastructure funding may be involved in this as well. I know it is mainly meant for bridges and roads and things like this, but this seems to be even more of a crisis that affects millions of people in the US. So I would imagine that part of the Biden administration funding would be available for this. David Baxter has a lot of experience in binational PPPs, so it would need people like him that have that expertise to bring different governments together. And then I think more important here for me is the politics of it than the funding, because if the politics line up, the funding can be found.
Yeah, definitely. First things first, right? Get the arrangements between both countries and have that, and obviously then comes the creative part of having a blended plan. Alternative fuels, a good mix of different. That's why I said maybe not the entire project can be P3, but there could be certain ways to finance in 3 bonds, and there is a big market and appetite. But one of the other stuff that we got to consider is the legal ramifications. How do you structure such a project legally? It's important to know, because in the end, everything's subject to a contract. I've been doing contract management for 30 years and project management, and the devil's in the detail, and the transfer of risk. That's very important. You do the risk allocation, let alone in a project in a single country, now consider that in 2 countries, currency risks, legal differences in both countries. So with that, I want to ask Lowry, what is your opinion? How this
sorry, just 1 minute, just to mention also Lori, because Lori is also quite an expert on binational PP.
I know she is.
As you are. I mean, you're a fantastic team. You should be involved in this, all of you.
Ziad, you brought us all together, so thank you. And thank you for the question, Oscar. You hit the nail right on the head in terms of how important contract management is, and the allocation of risk. I think we're seeing more and more, especially in the last few years, private entities being more risk averse, because we're seeing governments trying to push the risk onto the contractors, onto the private entities. So when you see something like that, it tells me that we really have to make sure all of the contracts that are in place are strong, that address everything. I'm working on a project now, which I won't name, but we're talking about how to fund maintenance of the project, because it wasn't properly accounted for, at the outset. So for a project like this, I think, I have a laundry list. I won't go over all of it. I don't know if you guys can see it all, but, it ranges from land acquisition to the moving of utilities to, obtaining the right permits, the union issues. As David Baxter mentioned at the outset, I did a fair amount of work on the P3 project with the Gordie Howe Bridge here in Windsor and Detroit. That's a $5.7 billion project. And I was working on the land acquisition piece and some other parts of that project. And so there are a large number of things. What I will say is that an ounce of prevention is really everything in this. So the more that you can think ahead down the road of what the potential issues are to try and avert them and address those early on, even though it might be tougher in those early negotiations, people are definitely more appreciative of it, when you have to deal with those issues later down the road, and you've got the right backup in the documents, and we definitely see fewer claims once you've got those right contracts in place.
Yeah, definitely claims is something near to my heart. I am a dispute resolution advisor, so sometimes those specific verbiage in the contract is important to have a panel of experts, especially when you have a performance, right? When you're trying to pay part of the project to performance and you need performance indicators, rather than having a dispute between parties, let's just refer to an expert panel who can give us advice during the construction phase, during the operation phase. It's important. And every asset is meant to last at least 40 to 50 years. And with that, I want to ask Mr. Wayne Collins about his perspective about asset management of projects such as this. What will it take and what indicators are necessary? Wayne?
Thanks, Oscar. And actually, pick up on Laurie's point, and it's very relevant. And sometimes those details or important details or components of a project get forgotten. So the maintenance aspect is very critical. It's one thing to put together a P3 arrangement or a long-term deal and infrastructure project, but if you don't have all the components to carry it through to the end and deliver on it, then that's where it falls down. So that's a critical piece. Asset management, it covers all those bases, including the risk part of it. But I think it's important to have that all tied in with the good governance and the structural components of a proper project that's well communicated with all the input of stakeholders that really understand what's going to be involved in this, and you have that key piece. I mean, I come from a facilities management background as well and been involved in PFU projects in different types of infrastructure, and sometimes that was the forgotten part, even in the design stages. So I think it's of critical importance that you look at what you're looking at and incorporate all that in as far as technology and how you're going to manage that asset well, because that ultimately that's what comes to delivering on what the outcomes of this project are, as well as it impacts the finance, the value for money. If you're going to have increased costs that were not unforeseen, then that's not going to be a good thing. So asset management really covers a lot of the key components of the project. I think it's understanding that and building in the flexibility, because technology does change. And we've seen that in what Larry outlined very well in the historic components and what needs to be done now. So it really is looking at it and putting it all together so it crystallizes the solution as you're putting this project together today, but for tomorrow. And like you say, you've got 30, 40, 50 years. So you've really got to be flexible and adaptable and build that into your pricing as far as what you have to allocate for resources and money, as well as changes to deliver on that ultimately.
You brought up an interesting point. It is about value for money. It is about looking at the asset in a long-term perspective, bringing those operating costs into present value, analyzing it, and with that comes technology and innovation, right? And another factor is called resiliency. You need to have resiliency already built in, even in the design process. So when you construct it and then maintain it, you're building in certain safety factors. So with innovation and technologies and that, I want to ask Sharon, what technologies are needed, especially in this type of project, that you think want to contribute? Sharon, please.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Oscar. So really, what we delve into is the fourth industrial revolution technology. And when we start to get into machine learning, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, and data sensors to enhance the built environment, simply by blurring the lines between the physical and the physical world and the digital reality. And it's done through those technologies. Now, there are endless possibilities to capture this data that we incur on this project or on this water PPP and digitize the physical world. Now, the 4IR technology integrates with an approach called decentralized finance, which includes blockchain, cryptocurrency, stablecoin, smart contracts. All of these digital tools can be utilized to better raise project finance, mitigate risk within project management, and automate, like how you said, the weak supply chains that are needed for large scale water P3s. And to make a project commercially feasible, you have to have the SPV has to have the capability of raising capital from private sector individuals. That's why we call it a PPP. And they have to have the operational capacity and efficiency in order to be able to deliver on the debt interest payments and deliver, free cash flow for the investors, which can, speaks to Wayne. And what goes with that is giving the investors, private investors, the I would say comfortability within a project to be able to attract that investment, sort of decrease the barriers to entry through technology and enhance the trust, through the wet DeFi and 4IR technology. So with this project, Oscar, it seems like a huge undertaking, and the raising capital, we have to ask if it fits a P3, is there market appetite for it? Is there investor market appetite? And is there efficient cause for there to be this to be a P3? And what would the challenges of private investment that blockchain and these integrating technologies could alleviate are the high barriers to entry. Improving the ability for individuals to actually access these investments directly to increase that pool of investors that would flock to this asset, and as well as improving asset lumpiness and illiquidity and the limitations of investors to enter in, these discussions with these infrastructure projects. So technology all around has a robust application to the built environment as a whole. But in terms of raising capital and then really developing the project and giving it a whole life cycle management approach, that's where I believe technology would really can be inserted and implemented, as Wayne was saying, to help that life cycle approach of a project.
Yeah, I will also add that there's a lot of new materials, smart devices that can be embedded in the infrastructure. They will give you the opportunity to monitor that resiliency and also the maintainability. So that's important, because in a project such as this, which I can see it would probably be a non-solicited proposal. It is not, for those who are not familiar with the term, it's a proposal from the private sector that not necessarily any government or any agency is promoting, but it's a solution that the private sector feels that through innovation and the creative approach, it can solve something like that. So David, non-solicited proposals, you think it's a viable alternative, given the environment we are between the United States and Mexico? I think it's a good tool. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so yes, I agree. I just wanted to tie back very quickly to what Sharon said, is, when we try to generate, interest from the private sector, one of the most important things is that there has to be an understanding that there's going to be a revenue stream that's going to keep the project moving forward, because this is not a philanthropy where there's going to be investors that are going to pile tons of money into it and take a loss. But, one of the biggest sources, I think, of innovation where governments are not thinking out of the box are unsolicited proposals, where an institution or a private sector body approaches a government and says, we've got something that is innovative, would you consider this? The challenge in this case with the unsolicited proposal would be, if it's a binational project, there'd have to be a very strong champion that's identified at least either side of the board, or at least one of the sides of the borders, who can become a champion for the project. But unsolicited proposals do open, as I said, a door to new ideas and to new innovations. And I suppose the only challenge really is how receptive are the state governments that would be part of it, or the federal governments of both countries if they're involved, and what are their constraints, you know, for considering unsolicited proposals. And, you know, one thing that's critically important with unsolicited proposals is if there's an innovative technology or a new idea is being introduced by PPP, the originator of those ideas needs to receive some protection of their ideas so that it's not hijacked, you know, by a competitor, or somebody puts all the effort in and then somebody else comes along and you know, wins the contract for whatever reason, and the originator or the original proponent is cut out from it. So, you know, this creates, you know, a very careful need on how you approach it, you know, getting some commitments from the governments that you're reaching out to, or the stakeholders before, that at least you're going to have a fair chance, if they consider it, to move forward. So I'll end there.
Well, I've been involved in several unsolicited proposals, particularly in Mexico, and there is, and it's the same in the United States, under the P3 law, the federal P3 law. There is a chapter on non-solicited proposal and rights, precisely the one you mentioned, you know, but you got to have the buy-in from the implementing agency. Those buy-in will be with a letter of intent that they look favorably on this proposal. And then, like everything, you will do everything at risk. You know, the private developer will put his finance and creativity to work at risk, because it not necessarily is going to materialize into a tender. But once the project goes through all those phases, and there is a particular phase in Mexico called the eligibility index, where it's a multidisciplinary approach where you check if this project is eligible to be a P3, you know. So there's other tools involved, and other tools that are also promoted by the Inter-American Development Bank, as Sia mentioned. But once that project is tender, and you have an international tender opportunity, you have certain rights it gives you under that non-solicited proposal. And if you're not the awarded contract to you, at least you will get repaid all your investment. Somebody turn the chat, can you turn your mic on? So it will make it not a risky proposal, because you will recuperate your cost involved. All right, we got about 15 minutes left. We're going to start the Q&A. There's a couple of questions already in the Q&A chat. Please use the Q&A chat, not the regular chat. And there's a question here for Larry. What is the CapEx that you anticipate for 5 million acre feet per year? Sia also brought it. What's your estimate right now? And is it phase in or the entire global? So talk about the economic necessities that are setting for this project.
Okay. Okay. First of all, this is it involves the United States and involves a captive market. It also involves some of the most valuable real estate in the world, Southern California in particular. And that there's a lot of money in the United States, and there's a lot of resources in Mexico. I think that's where a deal gets made. I think that the United States having the bigger hand in why we're in the situation that we're in here, and having the controls that have been in place for a while that aren't working, has the biggest stake in this too. When you look at California's economy and measured in trillions of dollars per year, you look at the economy of the southwestern United States, there's a lot at risk here. So I'm going to get to the chase. You're looking at, for an expenditure on this, about $100 billion. That's a lot, but there's a lot to it. And the benefits of this are great. We're going to be selling water year after year after year to the United States, and that water is going to be at a profit.
So the majority of, let's say, the market right now is demanding, at least in Arizona and California, a certain $500 per acre feet. Usually, desalination of this type will be in that range from $500 to maybe $1,500 a square acre feet. So one of the things to consider is this project can be subsidized by the United States in a way that under Mexican terms, there is a cap, the tariff for the Mexican consumer. So it will be a two-tier approach where the subsidy for preventing a very high price for the Mexican consumers be subsidized by the U.S. And there's $1 billion already committed by the Arizona government because they're obviously they're landlocked and they're looking at alternatives such as this to make it happen. So with that, let me see if another question is here in the chat. That question from the CAPEX was asked by Silvio Durian. So regards Silvio.
So did I answer that, Oscar? Because maybe
Go
there's
ahead.
a little more.
Go ahead.
And I would see the United States ponying up a big chunk of this from startup capital, and that Mexico would not have an expense in this because they're giving up their resources, and that there would be a sales of private-public partnership that would sell this water to the United States, and essentially whatever the amount is, they're going to pay it because they have to. There's no other. These are very distracting.
Yeah. Well, we can always transport water to the piping system. We can always have a mix with sharing water with the accords. We do have a 1944 accord done by the International Water Boundary Commission. Something like that.
We do have avenues to start this process. The United States has money that there is no other viable method on earth, despite what I'm seeing in the chat thing here. There is nothing else that's going to replace this, and it's sustainable. And the amount of water that we're dealing with is huge. And that the only way this is going to work is on a similar basis, by commitment. The United States, like going to the moon, we commit to doing this. Mexico, like going to the moon, we commit to doing this. And we enter a new paradigm through it. And people will pay. If it's a $2,000 an acre foot, that's 2 or 3 households. That's easily burdened.
Well, the thing is, this is not about just water source and transportation. It is about restoration. So the project main goal is to restore it. So with that, I want to ask Wayne. Wayne, in similar projects you have participated, roughly the operation costs as a percentage of the CAP is what your experience is in other type of projects.
Well, it can vary. I mean, it's certainly a lot more when you look at your construction costs over the life cycle. The actual O&M operations and maintenance is a significant part. It's going to be like 80% or whatever when you're looking at it. So, and then when you're factoring in some of the risk and technologies in some of these components here in this particular type of project, your cost may be somewhat higher. But I think, Larry, coming back to the sort of economics of it and looking at the viability, you have to do something, and you have to have a plan with the proper infrastructure and technology, and that's really the key. The cost and the components of the maintenance of that asset is not something that's that prohibits it from carrying forward and really making it viable. It's really having the right components together, and then that's essentially what you're looking at. But it's a significant amount. But if it's well planned and allocated and resourced, then that's part of the solution as well. So I don't see it as being inhibits the project to make it not viable. Put it that way.
Yeah, well, the biggest investment obviously is the construction fee, the biggest part of it. There's a question here by Michael Kerrigan. Is there a precedent for a similar project elsewhere in the world? So I want to put that on the floor, and anybody want to make a comment on that? David, Luciano. Is there a project of this scale or a precedent in the world? And as far as I know, I'm not sure.
No, I wouldn't. It's a good question to ask to the head of our Water and Natural Resources chapter, who's unfortunately not with us here today, but we can do that and get back with an answer.
Thank you. We will certainly circle back with Michael. and tell them about that.
Amazing.
But there is precedent with other binational projects, and I see David Baxter raising his hand. Go ahead, David.
I know that in the Dead Sea Valley between Israel and Jordan, there have been explorations of geothermal activity as well because of the deep crevice. It's pretty much a bit like the California rift that's forming, with the Baja California. The same sort of things happening with the Red Sea and the Dead Sea, going up in the valley there. And that might be something to explore, that, could one use geothermal energy to take a highly, salinized water source and both in Jordan and Israel to then, generate water. And many of the same issues that Larry pointed out about salination, dying rivers like, the Jordan River, which is essentially a little puddle now, things like that. And so maybe that is a consideration to look at what they're doing there.
Yeah, certainly Israel is at the forefront of desalination. They have a lot of technology. Larry, you want to mention something?
Yeah, I did. I want to kind of go a little further into this O&M and R, that we're not going into this lightly. And we're not just fixing the water supply. So it's not a comparison. You can't compare. There's no apples to apples on just a gallon of water versus a gallon of water. We're going to be using the best available technology that's available at the time. And we're going to be fixing the electric fields, and we're going to be restoring habitat. We're going to be doing a lot more than just delivering water. And the materials that we're going to be using, they're going to be space age, cutting edge technology. We're not going to be using concrete. We're going to be using plastics, modern plastics. We're going to be using things that have design lives measured in hundreds of years instead of decades. We're going to be using technology that it's difficult to even think about right now. And as far as what the overall costs go, I'm a scientist. I'm not a businessman like that necessarily. I don't do math with numbers normally. What I deal with is facts and what I can see. And with this, when this technology, the cost of that water may drop precipitously when you get the right technology involved. As we bring in new technology to generate electricity, new metallurgy, all of these things, all of that tends to collapse the overall cost of this. So when I'm throwing that out there, I'm throwing out that is all in, big picture, and not play the games that they play with a lot of these projects where they start out with a small number and eventually it becomes a balloon. And that this is something that I want to see that's going to be put in with permanence, this kind of thing. And this is a system that can be carried to other areas, like we were discussing about in Jordan in particular.
Well, I do want to add before I give the floor to see we got to look at it.
Wait, one more thing. 100 billion is not too high. They give, how much do they just give to the Ukraine?
Yeah.
And I mean, what is California worth in terms of trillions of dollars per year in income generation that would be lost if Southern California lost it? If you lost everything in Phoenix, I think, any observation that would oversimplify something to that degree is just completely inaccurate and dangerous. So with that said, I'll turn the floor over.
Yeah, that's why we're analyzing how to make this a bankable project. And certainly costs right now, we're talking very preliminary costs parametrically. Those are going to refine. So Siad, you have your hand raised, please go ahead.
Yeah, first a comment and then a question to Larry. I mean, I hear you, Larry, about what you're saying, but I think that eventually you're going to want to have some people on your side that are going to help with costing, because obviously any decision by anybody is going to depend on that. But my question my question is, how are you proceeding? What are you doing now to educate legislators and government officials on this problem and the solution, and what are your lobbying efforts like?
Well, we've met with representatives in Mexico since about 2015. We've met with Baja California representatives. We've met with the governor of Mexico. We've met with the head of fisheries. We've met with Canagua. We've met with CICESE. We've met with other government, SILA, the Border Commission. We've also talked this over with IID, the Bureau of Reclamation as well. And we're putting the word out to everyone we can, starting from the government down.
In the US, in Washington?
We're in the process now of trying to solicit this up to Biden's administration.
Very good. I mean, wish you the best of luck with that. It's really an important project, and I agree with you. 100 billion, I mean, these things are not, and I agree with Oscar also. I mean, it's just these are preliminary numbers that one has to cost and arrive at something that eventually is more accurate. But these are problems that involve cities and major areas, as you said, of some of the most expensive real estate in the US. And I would imagine that in a PPP setting, this would need to be a true partnership between public and private, because the private may not be able to, let me say it differently, a substantial part of the cost would need to be borne by governments and taxpayers and in that region. And the question becomes then in the project design, what part of the cost is going to be borne and how it can be segregated perhaps from the part that the private sector is going to invest and recoup. And so I think the financial engineering, the costing and financial engineering, the business model at the end of the day, the financial model are of course going to be crucial, but I know you know that already.
Thank you, Siad. We got time for a couple more questions. There is one in the chat before I give to Wayne, and he raised his hand. There's one by Vero Dennis, and hi to Vero. He is also part of a North American chapter. He is our Caribbean liaison, so he has a lot of experience as far as financing. So the question from him is, what would be the seed funding required for this type of project? So obviously, as an entrepreneur, you have to put your money at risk. And but I'll let who wants to take a dive at this one. Siad or David, you're the more, or Larry, you want to take a Larry?
I just saw it pop up on the screen. Government.
Well, the
They're here,
the government will play a big role. And the government, like I said, has international commitments. They can tap into resources that are very through bonds, maybe even some grants. So there'd certainly be a play role. Wayne, you have a question?
Just to add to what Larry was saying too, and in response to sort of the sticker shock, I guess, if you will, of the cost, which to compare, you can't compare apples to oranges. This is different. There's not another project like this of such complexity and with the requirements. So there's nothing to really benchmark or compare to. I think the real thing is we wanting to say, what would this be, looking at present value and today's technology in dollars, what are we looking at to facilitate that project? But the other thing you got to compare to is the risk, as part of your risk analysis, is the cost of not doing anything or the cost of delaying it, and then the costs are going to be borne anyway. Exactly. To deal with that. So that's a critical piece, because this is something where it's not a nice to have. This is imperative we do something, and people can come and say, well, we should have started before, but the fact is we've got a lot of ground wall of support now. I think what really that factors into the equation is what's looming ahead as far as the risk and the cost of not doing something. That factors into the equation too, and it could this end up can be much less over the longer term once this project is properly implemented. And I think Larry commented that very well. So yeah. The technical aspects, that's a key component that should be articulated and messaged to everybody so that they're well aware of that.
Yeah, the cost of action. That's a good point. Siad, you had a comment?
Thank you, Oscar. It's a question to David. Do you think that our friend Morteza Farajian in Washington can help with this, and can we put them in touch with Larry? And
David, you're muted.
Yeah, I think it is, something we should consider, because I know they're always looking for projects. One of the biggest problems with the Biden infrastructure plan is there's billions of dollars floating out there, and there's projects that are being looked for. And I think the value proposition would be, to work with some state governments, Arizona, California, maybe New Mexico, and all maybe all the governments state governments who are on the Colorado Compact, to find some champions there and then see if there's something can be done. Because I think if there's a fight on the go, as Larry would know, at present on water allocations on the Colorado Compact. And some states like California to say, don't you dare cut our water off. But if there's a way that they're going to get water, through how would you call it, a project that is innovative as this, it will take that pressure off and relieve, the political pressure. And then I suppose organizations that one would have to definitely work with as well is the Bureau of Reclamation, because they control the dams. And I think they would be happy if there was some way that water levels could be, let's say, drainage through, if it's domestic use, or the biggest problem is agricultural use. They use enormous amounts of water on the Colorado. If that could be alleviated, then they wouldn't have to let as much water out of the Lake Powell and Lake Mead, which then could allow those water levels to rise for a time when it is really critically needed. I mean, one thing that's been very disturbing for me is, after the very wet winter that they've had in California, and everyone's saying the whole situation has been improved, but California is downstream of the Colorado River. That is not going to really impact the water levels. And, maybe the Utah snowpack and the Colorado snowpack, but there's a deficit in groundwater. So a lot of that water is not going to just automatically flow in. And I used to live in Salt Lake City. The Great Salt Lake is in a great crisis. It's basically drying up, and the state's not going to give up its water rights to, for California, for example, if it's going to turn the Great Salt Lake into a dust bowl. And Larry talked about, the pollution and air pollution and dust and everything that's created. So long answer to your question, Ziad, but I think there's, numerous organizations, the Build America Bureau of Morteza, BUREC, state governments and all of that. They'd be crazy to ignore solutions like this.
Certainly, the Salton Sea has been pursuing that through the California Water Agency to restore part of it, and this could be part of the solution. And agriculture, I concur with that. Agriculture's it's needed, but it's also the biggest offender. And they have to invest in new technologies and augmented their water supply. So this is a front from many aspects. It's not necessarily that. And we will really, I'm going to have Sharon talk to you 1 minute because we're going to close soon. Sharon.
On the topic of irrigation, there's actually tangible technology projects being used to enhance irrigation. One called Liquid Prep, and they created a platform that includes a decentralized mobile application that enables farmers to upload actual and local soil data via strategically placed moisture sensors. So moisture sensors are put in the field to capture and upload data to the mobile app, and then the app interacts with the IBM server in order to understand exactly real time what the quality of the soil, the amount of water it needs, and the amount of water it's going to need for predictive analysis. So just my 2 cents on that.
Well, my final comments, this is an economic development project where you have energy and water necessary for economic development. And like I said before, we're promoting the US and Mexico near sourcing supply chains along with Canada, but it also involves the agriculture sector. So we have to maybe sometimes expand the scope of a project to include all those things to make it bankable. I want to thank everybody, our distinguished guests, obviously our President Ziad, it's very glad to have you here, Mr. David Baxter, Wayne, Sharon, Larry, and of course our distinguished guest, Larry. Thank you so much for this. I think it's been very illustrated we will certainly have another one soon. Water is definitely the next goal. I concur. And with that, any final comments? We'll let that our Presidente, Ciad Alejandro, make the final comment, please.
Thank you so much, Oscar, and thank you so much for hosting us today and organizing this. And you know, this is awesome. Really thankful to everybody, and look forward to more meetings like this and discussing more projects. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Everybody had a great day. We'll be soon.
Bye for now.
Bye.